and welcome to the Art Workshop. My name is Christopher Epling. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, having been shot here in studio where I work most of my work every day. It's a little shop that I have with all my stuff in it, and today's show is going to be very interesting. I think you're going to enjoy it quite a bit. This is probably the first real attempt that I've done at something. I don't even want to say along Bob Ross lines because it's totally not the quality of Bob Ross. But having said that, though, this does deal with using wet on wet technique, which we did in, I think, our 50th episode anniversary, where I dressed up as Bob Ross. You can check that out on the Pike TV 99 YouTube page. But in today's episode, you will need acrylic paint, and we will be using spatulas. We're going to be using dry brushes, and we're going to try our best to put together something along the lines of this right here. Now, this is the finished painting of what we're going to be doing today, but you'll be able to follow along step by step in today's tutorial, or workshop, I should say, and you should be able to do this. So if you do have acrylic paint at home, grab those. The colors that you're primarily going to need are going to be blue, white, green, black, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of, if you have an offset like a purple, you may need that too. I do blend a color previously to starting, so I'll talk about that. It's almost a violet color, and I think that's about all the colors you're going to need to do this entire painting with. You're going to use a lot of white here, so be prepared for that. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and thank you all so much for tuning in. If you do follow along with us, please share it. We'd love to see it. piketv99@gmail.com. You can send an image to us of your work, and we will share it here on the show. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into today's workshop. You're going to want to start out with some pure white. Now place it towards the bottom portion of your canvas, followed up with some violet. Now this is pre-mixed violet, just a little bit of blue, mixed with a little bit of white, a little bit of purple in there too, just a tad. Now this is the middle portion, and then the top is going to be pure blue, no mixing here. Put it on sort of liberally. You want to be able to get enough of that at the top to mix well. Now the goal here is for us to blend with a dry brush going from bottom to the top. Now as you're blending, you don't want to go back down. You want to make sure you go from the bottom to the top. If you go back down, you're going to mix the darker colors in with the lighter colors. After I did this, I looked at it and I noticed I didn't really like the way that the three colors blended. So I grabbed another brush, this time loaded with some white. Now I'm coating the entire top all the way from the midsection up. Now I'm going to make sure and get all this mixed well so that a nice blend from the white up to the blue. Now you're going to add clouds here, the next portion, which you're going to mix a little bit of black and a little bit of white. Get a little bit of a gray, a light gray, a Payne's gray color. Now you're going to add this first on your clouds, even though this isn't really a cloudy day scene. But what this does is it lays the foundation for you to add white on top of it later. It gives the effect that the cloud has a little bit of some shadowing into it. And we want the gray first because in this segment we're going dark to light, which is typically you go in reverse, but with painting wet on wet you can go back and move colors around. Now this paint, all of this acrylic paint, dries super fast, so I've mixed a little bit of Gamsol in with it. The Gamsol keeps it from drying too quickly, although it still, even with that added to it, dries pretty fast. Now it's up to you really, I guess, on how many clouds you want. My rule of thumb, I guess, when adding it is about composition, which we've talked a lot about in the show. Now the composition here is going to be, obviously your canvas, what's going to be, happening inside of that canvas. So I like to stretch my clouds out enough so that, it's kind of nice flow. There's not too many, but I don't want there to be a cluster of clouds in one portion and then none in the rest. So evenly distributed, such as this, will work. Now, what you're going to do next is going to be really adding where the clouds come to life for. So grab your white, take a round brush or a flat brush. I didn't have any round brushes available, believe it or not. I just finished a workshop, so all I have here with me are flat brushes. Now this would be ideal with a round brush, but I'm having to go in and do the best I can. Now the first thing you need to do is lay a nice coat of white on top of your gray. Don't worry about mixing so much right now. It's from a gradient, so you don't want to try to mix or your white with your gray, making, a different color. You're laying this on top of the color. And that's what Bob Ross did so well. He would work with these beautiful, solid wet on wet technique with colors, and he would lay those down on top of existing colors. Now, he also worked in oil, so this is obviously acrylic. It mixes differently than oil does. You can still get this kind of effect, though, just by putting it down liberally. So there's a lot of paint on my brush. My brush has a lot of paint. But once you've kind of identified where you're going to be placing these clouds, you can go in, add that white layer on top of it so that it is, sort of sitting on the gray a little bit. And you can add a few more in between if you want, just with the white. You don't really need gray everywhere. So if you feel like you need to add a little bit more to fill up the composition of your painting, you can. The next step in this, though, is you really want to go in loaded with just a little bit of some more white mixed with a yellow color. That's going to be the next step. But in order for us to lay the foundation to do that on, what we really need to do is pad out this color a little bit more. So we want to see it blended a little bit more. So allow your paint a little bit of time to dry. But once you have that kind of a dry, a little bit of a dry texture to the bottom portion where you started out with the gray, it doesn't have to be all the way dry, just dry a little bit. Go in with that yellow mixed with a little bit of brown and a little bit of white, and you should be able to go in and fill the bottom portions now on top of the gray with your colors. This should be able to work out nice and evenly distributed. I think the real goal here in this part is not to overthink the actual outline of a cloud or what the cloud might look like. I think it's more of an implied line. So what implied lines are, we have an entire episode about this if you want to check out Pike TV 99 on YouTube. Look under the playlist and you'll see the art workshop. But implied lines mean that you're putting down a line that resembles something but is not formatted so that it is actually drawn out like in a shape. So if you imagine like a cartoon line, you'll have an outline of the cloud and the cloud colored on the inside, right? So implied lines mean that there are forms, like general forms that your eyes see. I think there's a term for that, but I can't think of it. But if you see like matrixing also, that's another way of thinking about it. If you see something, an image, like people sometimes see faces in a piece of toast, the way the toast was burnt, well, that's almost along the lines of matrixing or implied lines. And in painting, if you do this form of painting where it's wet on wet and you have a really heavy shapes and using a lot of paint, you're going to use implied lines quite a bit. That's a really big portion of this. Now, inside of this cloud formation that we're putting on here, this light brown mixed with a little bit of white, mixed with a little bit of yellow, is supposed to resemble the reflection of sunlight on the bottom of the clouds. Now, we're not putting a sunset in here or a sunrise in here, so the sun is going to be, I guess, implied again as it being off in the distance. And what you're seeing is a reflection of that in the cloud itself. You don't need a whole lot of paint here, again. And there's different ways to present forms on canvas. You can add a lot of paint. You can also scratch into the paint that you have you're underpainting, which is the white and violet and blue. You can scratch into that using a utensil like a spatula, which is, or a mixing tool. Either one of those you can use. But in this exercise anyway, we're doing it by using a lot of paint applied heavily onto the canvas, and then we're mixing it lightly so the paint is setting on top of previous colors. Now what I'm doing here, I'm going in with another flat brush, and I'm mixing only the brownish yellow color. And I'm doing this almost as a dry brush technique, although there is a little bit of paint loaded. And what I want to do here is I need to offset that white, and I'm going in, and you can see maybe at a better angle here. I apologize for the quality of this video, but you can see here that the brown and yellows help to offset the white from the bottom portion of the canvas. I only did on the left and right portions because now with a little bit of gray, the same gray used for the clouds, you're going to draw with the brush. You're going to go in and make these arching patterns for mountains. So it's just going to go up and down, and you can place these wherever you want. Now these will be filled in solid gray, but You start out by drawing them very lightly on the edges, in the middle a little bit heavier, and this entire shape is going to be what we call a vector shape with digital art, so it's going to be filled in, completely filled in. But you need to go ahead and add inside of this a solid color of gray. Now you notice the edges have a little bit of white on it. I'm going in and mixing. I'm not really worrying too much right now about getting the form exactly right, but I want to just make sure and have the white sort of kind of blending off the edges. Now the white coming down, okay, so we pick one side we're going to work on first, and I'm going to pick the left side, so the reflection of the sun is hitting the left side of these mountaintops. And now I'm going to add that same brown and yellow combination with a little bit of white that I used for the clouds, and I'm going to mix this going down the left hand side of these mountain peaks. Now you break it up by just coming down, approaching the other portion of the arc of the mountain, and then you go down. So you're trying just to get the top portion of these mountains highlighted. You don't want to overkill it. You don't want to use too much. And if you use a little bit of heavier paint in some areas than others, it's okay. You just want to kind of just make sure, though, that you place it on one, either the left or right hand side of the mountaintop. Now, the other side of the mountain now, once we have the yellow and brown mixed in and presented well for the sunlight, we need a reflection of shadow. So that means that the opposite side that you choose for the yellowish color, you're going to use this blue. This is the blue that we had at the top, same blue. It's a true blue. I'm using a brush though that I've been using, so there is some white in that brush, and that's very, very intentional because I do want a little bit of white kind of breaking up. Not too much, but a little. So obviously, if you start out putting the sunlight reflecting on the right-hand side, you would put the shadows on the left. If you start out with the sunlight on the left, you put the shadows on the right. Now you're just going sort of down and sort of meeting in the middle, but in some areas you see that I'm not joining them completely. Now I'm going to grab the spatula. Now you'll need a few different tools to do a Bob Ross style painting. And spatulas are very important. Spatulas can be used to do the scratching that we mentioned earlier, but primarily what Ross used them for was to lay paint down on the canvas and to move paint around. Now luckily, the Gamsol that I applied earlier has made it so that the canvas is a little bit wet still, and I'm able to go in now with the spatula, a pointed spatula, and add very huge clumps of white. Not massive clumps, but you're laying down pretty thick paint here. I'm mixing it with a little bit of brown that I couldn't get earlier on those mountaintops that are further away. Using less paint on those mountaintops that are more towards the left enables you to give the impression that they're very small. You can get small detail. Blending now with the spatula is pretty fun because you can really see how things start to pop. Now, for impressionist style paintings, or surreal even, you give the impression that this is a mountain. Now, if you were to look at this and break it down into exact shapes, you're going to see, well, that's just a clump of yellow laying on gray. But if you look at it then again through your mind's eye, you will start to see mountaintops. If you try to approach this from a realism standpoint, you would handle this a lot differently. Although paint is going to be applied onto the canvas the same way no matter what style of painting you're using. You're going to have to put paint on the canvas. And one layer of paint holds the next, right? So you build like the foundation, then you're building up. And that's all we're doing here really. We're starting out with that underpainting, and then we start adding more paint on top of it, building the entire painting. Now with a larger spatula, I'm wanting to present almost like there's snow maybe on these mountains. So I'm laying a nice layer of white down on just below the brown here. A little bit heavier in some areas than others. And you'll notice that as I bring the paint down, I start to peck at the canvas almost. And as I'm pecking at the canvas, I'm actually wanting to get very fine detail. So similar to the way you applied the brown on the far left, You'll be applying small details of white as you go along the mountains. This helps to almost give the idea again that these mountains have ridges, draws, and spurs. It's not one big solid shape. It also helps to break up the painting. Now, you notice that when I started out talking about today's workshop, I mentioned we'll be using a set number of colors. And we'll use those colors throughout the painting. So, for instance, what I mean by that is that the same brown that I use for the reflection of light under the clouds is the same brown that I'm using on top of the mountains. And the same blue that I used at the top portion of the painting for the sky, I'm using for the shadow basis on the mountains. Using similar colors throughout a painting is very important. And using the same color in multiple areas of a painting is very important. The eye sort of draws down, finding similar shapes. The eye naturally draws across a painting or a surface looking for similar colors. So using that is really helpful. Now here comes a very Ross type thing to do with a painting. You take a brush that you've previously used. It's okay to have paint on it, or you can use a drawing spatula, a rounded tip spatula, and you lay this heavy dark color on top of all of this light color you've been using previously. We set the underpainting from white to violet to blue at the top of the canvas, and now we're laying the bottom forefront of the painting at the bottom of the canvas. Now the forefront of the painting, which is closer to you, is going to be darker. But automatically when Ross would lay down these very heavy shapes, heavy dark shapes, I would always look at him doing this and think, oh man, he just ruined the painting. But every time he would pull it out and just make something, really cool come out of it. Now, I don't know if we're going to say what we're doing is going to be really cool, but we're going to try to do something similar to Ross. And what we're doing now is taking a flat brush, a small flat brush, a 1 or a 2. We're going across that large solid shape that I just placed at the middle portion of the canvas, and I'm pulling these colors up towards the top. So I'm using the brush and I'm making up and down motions with the brush being more vertical than horizontal. So the tip of it is vertical. And I'm just making basically up and down motions, pulling the paint that I laid down up into the mountains. And this gives the effect of tree line. And you can get pretty detailed with this. You can go in and actually go back and forth and make limbs almost like a pine tree. If you notice a little bit of white kind of coming through, what that actually is a little bit of scratching done. So the paint that's on there is being scratched a little bit. And it's also a little bit of white mixed in there too. Having just one giant large black or dark shape, this is actually dark green, I mix black and green, breaks the plane of the painting up into two sections. But you don't want it just to be one solid color. You want to go in with a little bit of white mixed in, not much because you don't want an overkill, but you go in and make the back and forth motions in some areas, and to get almost like a breakup instead of just up and down lines, vertical lines, you're going to have some horizontal sticking out like tree limbs. Now, what happens though, if you're following along, or if you, obviously you're going to have to pause this video and go back over, I understand, but if you're following along, you're going to notice that as you're painting those trees, you have wet paint that has formed the mountain. So automatically your brush, when it goes up and down, is pulling paint down as it brings paint up. And that's a good thing though, because as you're bringing paint down, you're forming a little bit of light in that dark green, so it helps a lot. Now, what you're going to see happen next is going to be forming the foreground a little bit more. And in this, what we're going to be doing is using one of the larger flat brushes mixed with a little bit of white in there. And you're going to go back and forth pulling that dark green down into it. So I have white and green mixed together, and I'm pulling it down from the dark, really dark green you see at the top. And what you should be doing is up and down motions. Of course, I've been going left to right here a little bit too. But if you really want to get this to look more proper, it'd be only up and down motions here. The bottom portion of my painting is drying a lot faster than the top. I didn't apply as much Gamsol towards the bottom, and I guess I would say that I'm more pleased with the top portion of the painting than I am the bottom, and you'll see why here in a little bit, but it works. Now this is another very Ross thing to do too, is using your spatula as a drawing tool and offsetting the dark shape that you see with a little bit of white, just a white line here and there. Now this is supposed to be reflection of water, so those white lines that we're going to be creating going back and forth towards the middle portion of the painting are going to help to offset, to almost give the mind's eye that there is water there, there's light being reflected. And I messed up here because originally at the very beginning I should have put a little bit of violet down at the bottom portion of the painting too. And the reason for that is the sky should be reflecting. And I tried to go in and compensate for it, which is a huge mistake, because trying to go in and add a color that you should have already laid down as a foundation on top of paint never works. Although every time I do this, I try to correct it in this way, and every time it doesn't work as well as it should. But at least there is a little bit of blue in there now. So there's another form that makes up the foreground of this painting. So we actually have 3 different planes here. 4 really. We have the clouds, the mountains, the tree line, the lake, and then the vegetation. That's 5, right? So breaking a painting up by having different planes like this is a very Ross thing to do. So he goes light to dark, light to dark. And from here, the examples we have from that is light in the sky with the clouds, the mountains, dark with the tree line, lighter with the lake, and then we'll go dark again for the vegetation. Now I wanted to see a little bit more reflection in the water, and after I got the water pretty much as good as I could get it, remember back I missed the violet, but I wanted to go back and add a little bit of white in there to kind of offset things, and that's what you're seeing here. I'm using the spatula tool for fine detail. Add a little bit of white underneath the tree line on all forms of the tree line, so all the way to the left, all the way to the right. And I'm going to be a little bit heavier with these shapes on the left than I am the right, just because if you were to go across the entire lake making a lot of this, just a few lines here and there is okay. But if you were to go across the entire lake doing this, from left to right, it wouldn't look as broken up, and you wouldn't see it as a reflection as much as you would just another shape. Now I tried something here, and I don't recommend doing this with yours, but I wanted to see if I could scratch the paint to make it look maybe like some light reflecting off some tall grass. It didn't really work so well when I looked at it, so I thought, well, I can still correct this, but I'm going to have to go in with a brush, and I'm going to have to go on top of it here, and I'm going to have to blend it all back together. I'm going to have to raise the vegetation up above the water line. So just like you did with the tree line, you're doing the same thing here. You're pulling the green up that you laid down at the bottom, and you're trying your best to get it to come up into the water. Now, if I had some round tip brushes with me, this would have worked perfectly. But the flat tip brushes are limited in what they can do sometimes, and you can see that here for sure. I thought, well, one way to save this maybe would be to go in and kind of dab it. So taking the flat brush and dabbing it, on the canvas and then off the canvas, on the canvas and off the canvas might help a little bit. And you see me squinting. I sometimes should wear my glasses. I should wear my glasses all the time probably, but I don't. But dabbing the painting like this, adding different colors in there too. I pulled some blues. I went and grabbed some of the earlier brown, and then I mixed a little bit of yellow with green. Now the green that I'm using is the dark green that you see for the tree line and the vegetation. So that's mixed with black. So I'm pulling that green and I'm moving it inwards and I'm starting to blend with it here. So you can see it didn't come out as well as I hoped, even though that lighter green at the bottom still helps the eye to kind of see another plane there, so that maybe even a sixth plane, if you will. It helps to break the painting up from that light to dark pattern that we use and Ross is so well known for. So it doesn't work as well as I hope. And now maybe if the painting had dried a little bit more, this would have worked, but I'm mixing light green in there on top of the dark, and I'm trying my best to make this look like there might be grass or some sort of flowers, vegetation. And you make dabs with your brush, and using your brush almost as a mixing tool on the canvas is a very Ross thing to do. You really want to make sure that you're having fun with it as you go along and not overthinking it too much. If you overthink a Ross painting, you're going to be lost. Now, I'm adding a little bit of that violet and blue mix here. I think this would have been better off maybe using the spatula to add the color in, because I wanted it to be almost look like petals of flowers here. But the plane that mixed with the lake at the top of this didn't come out as well as I hoped. But overall, though, for this style of a painting, I think it turned out as well as we could go. And I'd love to see how you did. So please, if you did this with me or tried it with any medium, please share it at piketv99@gmail.com. And we would be sure and share it here on the show next time. So just finish up your painting with a few dabs of light in there mixed with blue. You can add more flowers if you want. Allow this to dry. And then go back over it using dabs of yellow, white, violet, and blue. And it should come out very nice for you. So is it Bob Ross quality? No, but I think we do have a pretty good jump start on getting this wet on wet technique process sort of figured out more. It's more accessible here in the shop because I have all the colors and brushes available to me. I can get really messy too. In studio, I can get as messy as I want. It's no problem. But I do have access to stuff that I didn't really think about even bringing with me had I done this in the studio, such as Gamsol, which is a type of matte medium that you can use to sort of loosen up pigment, make it a little bit more, take more time to dry. So that is something that we definitely used a lot of here because acrylic dries very fast, as we said. So I hope you enjoyed today's workshop. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please check us out every day here. The Art Workshop usually airs daily, and you can find all sorts of episodes, backlog episodes of all sorts of different types of techniques, different application processes, mediums that we use, utensils, tools, formats, approaches, all that stuff can be found under the Art Workshop collection. I guess we'll call it a collection on YouTube at piketv99. So search for that and you'll be able to find the channel. All sorts of good stuff on there related to our region and our county. So thank you so much for tuning in again. On behalf of the Art Workshop here and all the folks at Pike TV, I thank you. And until next time, I'm Christopher Epling, and keep drawing.